afternoon and welcome to the Namibian Conversation. Today we are going to talk about the role and responsibilities of directors, the board of directors of companies that is, as well as the executives to some extent because the two really go together. But specifically we've chosen to use Air Namibia as a study case, just to make the issues more concrete. And joining me today in the Namibian Conversation is Public Enterprises Minister Leon Jooste. Welcome to the Namibian Conversation.
Thank you very much, Ngeni. Happy to be here and happy to communicate with the public. Thank you.
All right. I mean, Mr. Jooste is the enforcer of corporate governance, right?
Yeah, in a way, the sheriff of corporate governance, in SOEs at least, I assume.
Yeah.
All right. Also, we have Ms. Vincia Cloete. Vincia is a corporate governance expert, a lawyer by training and practice. So she goes around helping the rest of us who run businesses to just at least adhere to basic rules of how an organization should be run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dangeni.
And welcome.
Thank you, Dangeni. I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, where do we start? I think there's so much happening, and our case study is a rolling story. What's the latest on Namibia, Mr. Jooste?
Okay, so the latest, you're ambushing me, eh? That's not a corporate governance question. I'm joking. So the latest is the liquidation has been filed, so it's been registered, so the company is now formally in liquidation. I think it was going to appear in the Gazette, Government Gazette today, in fact.
Okay. All right. I think that's a good start. It lays the ground for what we want to discuss. Company is in liquidation. And Namibia is supposed to be a government company, so how does it end up being a company and a government-owned business entity?
So maybe it's slightly different from a number of other public enterprises. So it was not created by statute. So it's a company under the Companies Act of Namibia, so normal commercial companies. So it's got to abide by all of those regulations, but then also it fits under the Public Enterprise Governance Act, so obviously with all our governance guidelines, etc. Yeah, there's a long story to Namibia, so from where it started to where we are today, lots of things happened, so commercially, governance-wise, so from all angles, there's multiple dynamics to the Namibia story, and I think it's a brilliant case study. I can't wait for the first PhDs on that, and there's some students probably going to pick that up. So a very interesting study. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it being a normal business, or normal company like many companies, maybe you can just then help us what we are talking about here, the role and responsibilities of directors, and this beast called corporate governance. What is it before we go into Namibia?
Okay, so
let's backtrack a bit and
yes, to the start.
Yeah.
So one can define corporate governance really as, in a simplistic way, as procedures and systems that are in place that board of directors and companies would use by virtue of checks and balances to basically drive a company, to have propel the performance of a company. So you don't just have your checkbox of checking your procedural aspects, but you also have systems that help you to monitor whether you're actually putting into effect the things that will help, or the systems that will help the company to be a viable institute.
So if I'm appointed or I'm offered a directorship, I hear lately people being warned, watch out, don't do this. And why shouldn't I just jump into it? After all, it comes with nice perks. We hear, at least the status, and we also hear some nice pay with it. It's some companies. Why shouldn't I just accept it?
So I think it's not just something you take at face value. When you think of, I'm gonna get a good check, it's gonna be a good designation on my CV. It's not the only considerations. It comes with fiduciary duties. It comes with.
What's that?
So I'm gonna explain that. So it comes with responsibility, basically being accountable and answerable to the board that you're going to serve, and ultimately to the company that you're going to serve, and ultimately then to your stakeholders and your shareholder. So that kind of responsibility is not a simple one that one should just say, I'm going to go into a company and I'm going to serve as a director without actually knowing what it is that you're going to do as a director. So your fiduciary duties are those duties that you owe, or the relationship that you have, especially to the company, to act in good faith and in the best interest of the company. So what you need to start to understand is, what is it that I'm going to do as a director? What is the role that I'm going to play? You can't simply think, oh, good check, good credentials, whatever. No, it's all about, how am I going to help this company propel in a direction that's viable for that institute?
Viable.
Okay.
Can you go a little bit more into the responsibility of making sure that the company is viable? I mean, we hear Namibia was not viable for years.
Beleaguered companies. It's a very sad situation, I think. There are so many beleaguered companies, and that's the category, I think, which plays Namibia, Trans-Namibia, and certain other
SME Bank.
SME Bank,
We
and
see
so
directors
well, that's no
are
longer
suing,
even beleaguered. It's literally done. It's gone down the drain. It's so the existing ones that we're dealing with. But going back to your question, viable. How can the board of directors ensure that a company is viable and remains viable? In other words, how does a company perform? So there are two main things that a board of director has to do, or the boards have to do. First of all, set the strategy for the company. You must set a direction in which the company has to operate. The business plan, your budgeting, what is the strategy in terms of your human resources, in terms of your marketing, and every other aspect of the company. This really speaks to the performance of the company in itself. And then the board has the second function, which is also a main function, is to control the activities of the company. Not only are you making sure that you have set the strategies and so on, but you're making sure that you're monitoring that you are achieving the strategies that you have set for the company. So those are the biggest things that you do. But now the third thing that I think every board should be knowledgeable about is that they do carry accountability towards the stakeholder and to the shareholder to report on the performance of the company, making sure that you have propel that company and have driven the company in a direction, and that you're not only just sitting with the information, but you're telling the shareholder you have interest in the company, and this is the direction in which the company is going. And to the stakeholders, your employees, the customers, the environment, the society, you want to show that you are a responsible corporate citizen of a certain country or in the environment. And so you have this responsibility. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Minister,
Yeah.
in Namibia, we have had for many years, I remember in Parliament, DDA politician Mr. Deval, every year he would raise the issue, where are Namibia's financials? Why are they not submitted? How is it possible that all these roles and responsibilities that are supposed to be delivered weren't delivered for years? What happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, it's abnormal, and there's no excuse for that whatsoever. So it should never have happened. They managed, I must say, the previous board managed to catch up slightly, and the latest board tried their best. In fact, I can tell you, I mentioned that in Parliament yesterday, they were about to conclude all the financials up to date in October last year. COVID came, there were some procurement issues with the auditors, etc. So it was slightly delayed. But that doesn't matter, it should never have happened. And I also want to, now we're talking about the various layers, so directors, we've got the layer that starts with the shareholder, then the directors, and then the executive, and then the rest beyond those. Now, for a shareholder, that's an absolute nightmare. So I refuse to work off figures that are not audited. If in the absence thereof, you have no choice. But that puts a shareholder in a very precarious position, because in the absence of the figures and the financials being audited, you are never entirely certain how accurate and so they've not gone through the process. So that puts the shareholder in a very vulnerable position. So we really, and Namibia is not the only one. I would love for us only to talk about Namibia, but sadly there are others.
No,
Yeah.
so it's only a study, a case.
So Tangeni, so we're really fighting to fix that. Now we can use. We fortunately activated our law, so now we can use some of the tools, the provisions in there to enforce this. So in the new performance agreements, we are now containing governance targets. So in the past, the older performance agreements purely focused on commercial and operational performance, but there was never any element of any corporate governance targets in there. So now we have governance targets. So we sit with the board and we negotiate. We can't also just simply impose. You would know that if a company has several 5-6 years audits that need to be done, you can tell that board and the CFO with his or her whole team, what you want, they rely on service providers to conduct the audits. So if you have 5 years of audits that need to be done, I can tell you the best auditing firm in the world for a large company like in Namibia will not be able to do that in a month or so. It will take them months to do that, because regardless of the delay and they've got to go through every single exercise, because ultimately the auditor is signing that off together with the board. So,
under normal circumstances, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, by company law, there are consequences, right?
Yeah.
Could I just, even here, the Free Press of Namibia, the Namibian, can it just go years without being audited and that's okay?
Well, so I think I wanted to add to what the minister was saying is that the biggest role of the board of directors is that of oversight, governance oversight. It's really to make sure that we're not only ticking boxes, but we're really achieving what it is that the company should be doing. So one of the things, and I liked when you said you can't just sign off financials that are not audited, for instance, because you want to know that there's integrity in the decision that you are making. It's not something that you're just signing off because you saw numbers reflected on a piece of paper. So there must be some accountability from both ends, management as well as the board. The board has that oversight over management to make sure that management is achieving the strategies that are set by the company. And one of the other things is that how is it that over all these years the shareholder perhaps was never informed about the financials of the company? Is it that the board was sleeping and trusting that the CEO was perhaps competent enough to just run the business? Did the board take a pliant position, a reluctant position, and just sit back and say, well, I'm sure this company is thriving. There are planes that are taking off. People are coming to work. Everything is going on as it should. That's just the superficial end of things. But or did the board actually interrogate the information that was given to the board? Did they even interrogate why there are no financials being furnished within a certain period of time? The accountability that I'm now talking about is the party taking their responsibility to task and saying, we can't just be a pliant board. We can't just be a board that sits back and takes information which is not basically integrous, or information that's not full, information that's not, so basically that's what the board should come with, their own side of responsibility. And management obviously has been appointed because they are capable of doing certain things. They have certain prowess in running the business, and so management should also be able to take accountability. Not only should they be waiting on the board to say, we need to see the financials. There's a year end for every company in every entity, and when the year end comes, certain things need to be reported, and there needs to be transparency both to the board and then ultimately to the stakeholders, which is the shareholder, and then the other entities.
So Tangeni, if I may add, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I love this conversation. But again, to be a bit blatant on that, in a case like this, everybody's to blame. All the layers are to blame, and it's accountability through all of those layers. So why, and we can start from the top down or the bottom up, why was it allowed?
Who is everybody?
Everybody starts with the shareholder, the board, and the executive. Okay. So all of them had a duty. The shareholder to make sure that the board are compliant and that they have the auditors up to date. So why wasn't that done? The board was supposed to see to it that they do their job, and that the CEO and the CFO and their team do their job. CEO was supposed to make sure that his CFO or her CFO did their job. So through all of those layers, something went wrong, and somewhere in all of that, accountability simply disappeared. So you really can't run a company, and I can tell you, it's not just ticking boxes, as you had said. So what happened in their case, you might have recalled a few years ago, they went to the bank in Namibia to borrow money, and they were simply denied based on poor corporate governance. Said, where are your audited financials? No, they're 4 years old. I said, well, come back once you're up to date. Because so you run into trouble from all angles.
That brings me to a question that has come up a lot in news reports, that often the top executives, or in some organizations that are state-owned, just become a law unto themselves. Is that what you have picked up over the time that you've been minister, and what's to be done about that? Because in some cases these people are entrenched for a long time.
So again, we must understand why did that occur? How did people fall into that trap, if you want to call it that? I mean, I'm sure if you were to look at the history, the professional history of many of those executives, you would not necessarily see that throughout their career. So why? What happened that they fell into literally that sort of despondent trap, or whatever it is, and just not care anymore and get away with that? So I doubt again, and I'm sure you will agree, under a strong board and a shareholder, an active professional shareholder that's on top of their game, no executive will get away with that sort of behavior. It's simply impossible.
Like what will happen to them? I mean, so many are getting away with it. So
it depends on exactly what you're referring to, Tangeni. But if they are performing, if they're doing their job, then the board should be happy. So we're talking about people that are simply rude or whatever, arrogant. If he or she, if they are performing, if the company is doing its bit, then the board should be okay with that. Obviously, it should not be abusing people or in any way. But again, that falls firmly under the authority of the board, and the board should be dealing with that. It's not a shareholder issue, so it's not my problem, that's a board's problem.
And I just wanted to add to what you're saying, that the board is ultimately the authority in the company. So the board actually sets the tone all around the company, because it makes decisions, and it also it controls the activities of the company, manages the company, obviously through its management. So what I'm trying to say is, when you have management that has been entrenched, if you want to use that word, or you have management that has come to a place where they are law unto themselves, then you have a dysfunctional board. You have a dysfunctional relationship between the management and the board. Perhaps it's because management feels that the board is an unnecessarily part of the puzzle, and they just can't listen to a board because we want to do things. They are just here to impede our exercise of power. Perhaps that's probably what management is thinking. Or management is probably just antagonistic towards the board for other reasons that are not so obvious to the board. But then it speaks to the relationship between management and the board. The other side of the coin is also true, that management is so because the board has meddled in its day-to-day operations, perhaps, or the board is too pliant and they are just sitting back and listening to us, and they believe in us, and so therefore we just are law unto ourselves. The board just never takes up their responsibility of oversight and making sure that the management needs to report to us on time. They need to give us comprehensive reports. They need to give us information that we request at a certain time. So you have management that, for instance, will just report on short notice. They will give the board too much information that the board can never, take in before a board meeting, or they will some give little information or just distort information. So all those things can contribute to management just being who they want to be, because the board has decided we don't have to deal with this. This is not our responsibility, and that's wrong. It is the board's responsibility.
That's why,
Yeah.
we're having almost a dialogue.
No,
Yeah,
yes, stop.
But this
Yes,
is so powerful, and in my experience now with the SOEs, what I've seen, where this very often occurs, I'm sure you will agree with that, where you have a less than ideal composition of a board, in particular when it comes to skills, and in particular when it comes to sector relevant skills.
Absolutely.
So now you have a board, very nice people, but they're in a specialist company. Okay, and we can choose any of them.
Yeah.
There's nobody on that board that's on par with any members of the executive. They know that.
Yeah.
So that board is manipulated by, and that's human nature.
Yeah.
Any CEO would love to do that, would know that, look, I'm dealing with a bunch of people here that are my bosses, so to speak, but they're not on par with me technically when it comes to this business. So I can sell anything to them, I can manipulate them, I can make them do what suits me. And that's very often where you see that sort of culture. And again, the human beings, so all of us, I think, have a bit of that in us.
Yeah.
So then you become that person, you get away with that, and then maybe later on another board is appointed who might have better skills mix on there, but now you've created this culture. You are the boss. You actually, and we see that. We see executives running to the shareholder and bypassing the
That's
board.
it, yeah.
And it's that character who does that. Not your typical professional CEO would never do that. Never do that, because there you are breaking a governance boundary.
Yeah.
So it's that person that we've allowed to be created. So again, coming back to
Yeah.
that quality of the board, would just keep a CEO in his place.
We do need strong boards. And just to add quickly to that,
Yeah.
so the shareholder is the appointing authority of the board. So what must the shareholder then become aware of?
Yeah.
We can't just appoint anybody to the board because they seem to have a nice CV when they don't even understand what it is that they are coming on board for. We say in corporate governance basically that when you appoint somebody with no inkling of what they're about to do, you literally, there's tantamounts to illegality, and literally, boils down to a fraudulent appointment. So this is something the shareholder can
So in this
take note of.
case, let's address the shareholder representative, not the person of
Not the
Jooste.
ultimate, yeah.
I'm talking about the government, because the ultimate shareholder is the Namibian citizenry, right?
Okay.
What is the responsibility of this shareholder representative? Because I think quite a few things, as you alluded to, at different levels there have been failures. What should such a shareholder be doing?
Yeah, so
Or at least, how should such a shareholder be taken accountable to? It's like a proxy shareholder, isn't it?
So what was said earlier by the minister is that we have levels, right? And what we want to create is not a culture where one entity impedes on the responsibility of the other or crosses a line where they shouldn't. So you have the shareholder there, the appointing authority of the board. We have the board who sets the tone for performance in a board. And then we have management in a company, in the board, yeah. So yes, thank you, Dangani. And then we have management who needs to put into effect the strategies of the board. So we have these layers. But what can the shareholder then do when we look at these layers that we have? What can the shareholder representative do? He can basically, first of all, go back to the board that he has appointed. I think that's the first point of contact. I must go back to the board and I must start to interrogate, have I appointed a right mix of skills? Have I appointed an integrous board? Have I appointed people that have the educational background, but not just educational background, who have the knowledge of the industry that they're going to serve? Have we appointed people, not just diversity? Have we appointed people with the right age? Do we have differing age groups so that we have knowledge that's been carried from the past and expertise that are coming into being? Do we have gender roles? Do we have? So a lot of things need to be considered. It's not something that's so simplistic that the shareholder will just say, I'm just gonna stand up and close this company. I don't think it goes straight to that. Or the shareholder doesn't take up responsibility and say, I'm going to go now and become the CEO and make things happen. No, we need to work top down or bottom up, like he said. So we need to sort out this.
Okay.
Okay.
Minister Jooste, flowing from that, one wonders, do you provide clear mandate of what you expect of the board? Not you individually, but the government. And Namibia being case study. How is it possible? I don't know, since the president mentioned in Parliament in his State of the Nation address that Namibia will be liquidated, the government has over time said we are not pumping any more money. And then come, was it February or late January, the directors commit Namibia to pay a huge bill that there was no money for. How does that work?
Can I ask the question back to you?
Sure.
It's okay.
That's a tough
No,
one.
that's actually not funny. Yeah, so look, these recent directors of Namibia found themselves in a very uncomfortable position. Yeah. So again, I tend to, and I'm not protecting them at all. They are not friends of mine. They're individuals.
It's better to explain so that
Yeah.
the audience can understand.
But I'm very careful, to point any finger at any of their conduct. Again, a bit later down the line, we're going to be able to reveal all the information, explain the whole story, and why certain things from the shareholder side in particular was done in what might have seemed like an unconventional manner. But we can't do that right now. So, even that event, it's difficult to judge at this point in time and to understand. I've not discussed it because they resigned immediately after that.
Yeah.
So we've not really had, we're calling this program a conversation, so might have that conversation at the right time.
Okay.
But it just, and like I said, really not defending them, but they found themselves in a very uncomfortable position since they were appointed. And you may recall that the chairperson and vice chairperson resigned very early on, in fact, for similar reasons, and they resigned for going concern issues. So
let's talk about that.
Yeah,
that's really the issue. Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's if you are running a company that is not viable, the honorable thing to do is to do what? What are the steps available?
Maybe a turnaround strategy first of all before you jump the ship.
Well, Namibia has been around, turnaround.
So I was referring
it's probably not a good case study. Right?
I'm referring now generally.
Generally, okay.
Yes, there should definitely be a turnaround strategy. And when you appoint a board to a beleaguered company, you obviously want to appoint a board that's going to sort of do a business rescue. That's a different case. In Namibia, we have had board turnovers like no other, I would say. It must be the biggest board turnovers that we have had in Namibia. And what can we do? I'm sure the shareholder must have had in consideration the skill sets of the board of directors towards business rescue when they appointed certain directors at certain times. But what you don't know, as a board, you only deal with the information that's in front of you. So you can't deal with information that's not presented to you, for instance, by management. So you have layers that you need to really unravel in order to be able to answer this question. It's not a question that I can answer in the context, well, in Namibia, I can't really say how is it that the board failed. Was there no turnaround structure, strategy? Didn't the board do anything? Didn't shareholder do anything? But we have legacy issues. We've got legacy issues that the board might just never be, aware of. And how can we deal with this when we don't have...
Can we use other examples? There was the Avid SSC case. There is now the SME bank. There is now the SME bank case. Well, the Avid SSC case.
You know what happens, and again, it really will be sounding like I'm defending people, but I can tell you for sure, when that board was appointed, this last one of Namibia, I had no idea what the status of that company was. Absolutely no idea. So
except for the status that you see on the newspaper.
Yes, but otherwise, remember, they were appointed to a company where the last audited financials at that time was, 8 years or more behind. So a porter, taking up, being brave, taking up the call and say, yes, patriotism, everything, we will serve on this board. And some very qualified, I think it was a good board, by the way, definitely. But they had no idea. So suddenly when you discovered, and I think that's what happened with the chair at that time and the vice chair, when they discovered what monster they were dealing with and discovered that it was at that time already, as we know, for many years insolvent. Now the issue, it's a legal issue. So what they were saying that, look, unless the shareholder can maintain the going concern. So with other words, you get away with running an insolvent company if there's enough shareholder support. The moment the shareholder says, I'm closing that tap, and you can no longer tick that box, then you are trading recklessly, and as a board member, you can be held personally liable for that. And it's an insolvent company, so you will not get director's liability insurance from any broker in this country. So you are putting your head on a block, and that's a very dangerous situation.
This case is in court, but is that what the SME bank liquidators are pursuing? Is that the same line of thinking, that you were doing things that you were not clear what you are doing, or at least you were, what is it?
You were part and parcel? You knew of it? Or?
No, maybe you didn't know of it, but you were just not taking your duties seriously enough.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
That's also a risk, Tangeni, and I often hear people say that. But your problem, coming back to an earlier question, when you ask that, look, you hear some people warn about not taking board positions. And honestly, people, and I really want to inspire people to apply. We need a bunch of good people to make themselves available, and we're really finding it difficult at the moment. But there's a huge risk involved in that. It's absolutely massive risk. And one of the things, a board member can never claim ignorance. You can never, in a court of law, you can never say, I did not know. It is your job to know. So even if you say, but I'm not qualified, I didn't understand that, then the court will say to you, Tangeni, why did you accept that board appointment? You should have told that shareholder that, look, I'm not equipped for this board. So the moment you sign up, you become part of that collective responsibility and everything else that goes with that. So claiming ignorance when things go wrong will not get you off the hook. So you could be held liable for whatever happened in that company. If another board member, obviously there are certain legal merits. So one needs to be very careful. I must confess, I've not been following the SME case very closely. I've been obviously occupied with a bunch of other things, so I don't exactly know what the issue was.
Yeah, and so just to add to what you said, is in legal terms we would call that the duty of care and skill.
Yes.
So you directors owe certain duties to the company. We've talked about the fiduciary duty, now we talk about the duty of care and skill. You cannot neglect or abrogate your responsibility as a director. So you can't be acting negligently. And when I was saying in the beginning of our conversation, I said that it's an onerous position, it's an onerous responsibility. It looks good and all, but it's onerous in that you can't just say, I'm going to serve on a board without being knowledgeable about certain things. And one of the things and practical ways the board gets to know about things is interrogation. Have a conversation with the management who's running the company. So when you're sitting around the board table, lots of times I find